This morning I'd like to speak to you on the question, are these the last days? Lots of folks are interested in the fact that our world is almost a continuous calamity. If you watch the news, and I do enjoy watching it, I watch it on BBC and Al Jazeera and CBS and Fox and all the rest, and I think you'll have to agree that things are in a mess universally. And so the question comes up for believers, are we living in the last days before Christ's return? Everybody's interested in the future for one reason or another. Some even go to the world of the occult to get answers. The term occult or occultist means secret. So they go to secret seances and things of that nature with the whole idea of learning about the future. And the world of the occult promises two things: power and knowledge. Same two things that Satan offered Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. Some want political success and economic success. Nancy Reagan used to watch the stars and the horoscopes. But there are challenges today to the notion of predictive prophecy. Those of us who are Bible-believing Christians and take the Word of God seriously believe that the Bible speaks about the future and things that are going to occur. And we have a right to that opinion, by the way, and that conclusion, because there are more than 150 specific predictions of Christ's first coming. And they were all literally fulfilled. Don't let anybody tell you that God is finished with Israel and all these prophecies about the future are symbolic and you need to treat them allegorically. You can't take them literally. That's not so. And I haven't met an Orthodox Jew yet that allegorizes those passages in Isaiah about the future kingdom. So if Christ's first coming predictions were all literally fulfilled, there's no reason not to believe that the predictions of a second coming will be equally literal in their fulfillment. So when he went away physically and visibly, he said, I will come again. As you've seen me go, I will come again. I'm expecting a physical, literal return of Christ in the rapture for the church first, and then coming to earth with his saints at the end of the tribulation period after the Battle of Armageddon and during that battle. So I believe in predictive prophecy, but we live in a skeptical world that says, no, that can't happen. But we have the evidences in Scripture of hundreds of prophecies that were actually fulfilled, which makes Bible study exciting. Because in it we can find some portraits of the future and get an idea of the outline of what God has in mind and how the end will occur and what eternity is going to be like. God doesn't give us all the details, and the one big one is we don't know when Christ is going to come back, and that's a good thing, really. Because that means we have to live every day in the light of that possible coming and live a disciplined, holy life. But in the last days, the Apostle Peter reminds us that we as believers will be under scourge and challenge. They were in Peter's day. Listen to 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Knowing this, that shall come in the last days scoffers. Notice he's talking about the last days. Scoffers will be walking after their own desires or their lusts. And they will be saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers died, all things continue as they have from the beginning of creation. The charge will be, Christians have been hoping for his coming for centuries. And he has not come. Where is he? Of course, the biblical answer is he's exactly where he needs to be right now. And in God's time, Jesus will return. And we do not know the date of that. Now, this challenge that's recorded in 2 Peter 3 has three elements that I want to observe. First is the source of the challenge. That will be scoffers. The Greek has the idea of mockers. They will mock you. We live in an age of sarcasm and mockery. I never cease to be amazed that Christianity can be so abusively treated in the press and television They wouldn't think of saying those things about Islam or other religions. These are the days of open mockery. That's exactly what Peter says. That's the source of the challenge. Skeptics, deniers. The signs of the challenge, in verse 3, they'll be walking according to their own desires. You should compare with this the Apostle Paul's evaluation of the age in 2 Timothy chapter 3. So that's the signs of the challenge. These people will be walking after their desires. And we live in an age of egocentricism. I am who I am. And what I am is significant to me, and I will determine who I will be and what I will do, and I will determine what's right and wrong. Don't you impose your religious ideas on me. I know what's right and wrong, and I will determine that. That's the egocentric world in which we live, in which we have made the individual a personal deity. That's the signs of the challenge. The subject of the challenge is in verse 4, and it deals with Christ's second coming. Now, Matthew chapter 24, verse 3 asks two big questions. Matthew 24, 3. And Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately, and he said, tell us, here it is, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age? Every apostle wanted to know when. Are all these things going to happen that are described in Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse and all the rest? And the big question for us this morning is, are we living in the last days? And the answer is simple, yes, we are. Now let me explain what we mean by the last days, because it has several uses in the New Testament. The last days can refer to messianic times generally. That is, they begin with Christ's first coming. New Testament regarded believers in that day as living in the last days. Listen to 1 John chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. Dear children, this is the last hour. And as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it's the last hour. From the Apostle John's view, we're living in the last times. Look at the Antichrist and the violent behavior all around us. And he talks about these Antichrists. They went out from us. They did not really belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us. But their going showed that none of them belonged to us. These are wretched deceivers, sometimes within our midst. So it can refer to that apostolic period and the first coming of Christ in that range. It also refers to the last days of the age of grace and the tribulation period. And it's that with which we are most concerned. You see, in every age, since the date of Christ's return was not known, there was a passionate expectation of his coming. Even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. And to this day, we don't know the day of his return. But we, as saints in all ages, say, please come quickly, Lord Jesus. There are those who argue that those prophecies in the Old Testament that talk about a coming reign of Christ and a kingdom, you can't take those literally. They refer to the blessings of the church. God is finished with Israel as a nation. Nothing could be further from the truth, as we will see. God still works with his people in covenant and unique ways. And there is a future for Israel, and it is outlined and detailed in the biblical text. I've sat with Orthodox Jews on more than one occasion. In my last dig several years ago in Israel, I stayed at the house of Amos and his wife. And we'd sit out in the backyard under the olive tree, and he'd have his Hebrew Bible open, I'd have my Hebrew Bible open, and we would talk about the future of Israel. And I talked about the Messiah, the Mashiach. and would show him verse after verse where Jesus fulfilled the description of the coming Messiah. Passage after passage after passage. And then I finally said, Amos, you keep agreeing with me that Jesus fulfilled this, and this. But yet you still reject him as the Messiah. Why? He said, for the simple reason that when Jesus was on earth, he never delivered the Jews from bondage or the heavy hand of the Romans. Our Messiah will be a reigning king and a ruling individual. And he didn't do that. He could not have been the true Messiah. So I'd explain to him about acceptance and rejection and why there had to be a spiritual birth before there could be the birth of a kingdom. But one thing that impressed me with Amos and all of his friends, their interpretation of the prophecy of Israel is literal. These people know how to read Hebrew. And they know what their expectation, and beating deep in their heart is a time when God will bless his people, the Jews. They will have the land that was promised to them. They never occupied all the area that was promised to them in the Old Testament. Joshua never conquered that. David never conquered it. That's the territory all the way from the Euphrates River, possibly down to the Nile River. That's Israel's promised land. They never occupied that. That's going to happen in the future. Jesus will come, and after the great battle of Armageddon will establish a kingdom on earth. Revelation 26 times says it will be 1,000 years long. And Israel's going to occupy that territory all the way up to the Euphrates. I remember during the Iraq War that one of the representatives of the Iraqi government came on TV. And I was kind of half asleep at the time, but man, did this wake me up. He said, I don't care what the Torah says. Israel's not going to occupy our land. Hey, the guy had been reading the Torah. He got it right. A lot of Protestants don't get it right. He knew that eventually, and God's promise included the territory of Iraq all the way down to part of Egypt. That's going to be literally fulfilled in the kingdom period. Now the question is, can we establish the time of Christ's return? If we know that we're living in the last days, the answer is no. Acts chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. When they met together, they asked him, Lord, at this time are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Notice what their concern was. The kingdom of Israel. And its literal fulfillment. And he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority. It's God's time, it's God's choice. Well, what are the signs of the last days? If we're in the last days, how do we know that? How do we know that we're in the eschatological future times when prophecy is going to be fulfilled, and it may not be far before the rapture of the church takes place instantaneously? But we don't know the time or the date. But there are signs, because immediately after the rapture of the church, a whole series of things are going to happen. There will be national coalitions. There will be economic revisions going on. The rise of the Antichrist will occur. And so even before the rapture, there will be those precursors, those trends that start taking place, the nations moving. And we're seeing some amazing things, unparalleled in ancient Near Eastern and Western European history, that I think signal we're living in some pretty unique times. What are these signs? And should we recognize them? You remember in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus rebuked the Sadducees for not recognizing the signs of his first coming. Listen to Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 to 3. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him, asking him to show a sign from heaven. I like Jesus' reply. He said, when evening comes, you say there will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. You guys are great weather watchers, but you're not good prophecy watchers, and they should have been. Because the signs of Jesus' first coming were there. And he authenticated his identity by unchallengeable miracles that were public for everybody to see. There are times that I find Christians taking weather predictions more seriously than they do biblical predictions. And that's a problem. Well, here are some of the signs that mark the last days before Christ's coming. First, there is universal mockery of biblical truth and values. Universal mockery of biblical truth and values. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. First, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come scoffing, and following their own desires, they will say, where is the coming he has promised? Ever since the fathers died, everything goes on and has it from the beginning. We read that earlier. Just wanted to remind you of the last days. You will have people scoffing at your faith. Oh, you're expecting Christ to come. Well, they did that 100 years ago. Where is his coming? And the answer is, it will be God's time. God has not failed his promise, and he never will. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. So what are the last days going to be like? Listen to this. And think to yourself, how much does Paul's description fit our culture, our age, and our world? People will be lovers of their own selves. Lovers of money. Boastful. Proud. Abusive. Disobedient to their parents. Speaking of children. Ungrateful. Unholy. Without love. Probably 60% of pop music is about love, and they don't have the foggiest idea what it is. Certainly, they've not enjoyed lovely success in marital relationships through all the failures. Unforgiving, slanderous. Whoa, wait till we get to November and the elections come up again. You talk about slander, you're going to be knee-deep in it. Not lovers of good. They'll be treacherous, rash, conceited. The last days will have people lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. That's why there's empty spots in the pews. There are lots of people who could be here, but they love pleasure. That diverts that attention. Having a form of godliness, there'll still be religious people around. They may even walk in a church or two. But they deny the power of the gospel and have nothing to do with them. Here's Jude 17 and 18. But dear friends, remember what the apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ foretold. He said to you, in the last times, key phrase, there will be scoffers who will follow their own godly desires. Today there is open hostility to anything biblical or morally valuable. And that scorn reaches everywhere. Newscasts, specials, public opinion, professors to be sure. I really pray for kids who are in universities because every day they are beat about mentally with scandal and denial and sarcasm about their faith. And if they're in a state university, they need a lot of prayer to be able to stand that kind of challenge. So one of the signs, according to the New Testament, is in the last days, there will be universal mockery of biblical truth and its values. Secondly, there's the sign of Israel's restoration to her land. This is incredible. Listen to Isaiah chapter 11, verses 11 and 12. In that day, now that's a prophetic expression in the prophets. In that day speaks of the future day of judgment and the kingdom and so forth. And that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the remnant that is left of his people, the Jews, the Hebrews of the Old Testament and New, from Assyria, Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, to Hamath and from the islands of the sea. He will raise up a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth. That is what Isaiah prophesied in about 800 BC. On May the 4th, 1948, amazing thing happened. That began a process where Israel became a nation. Scattered for all those years among the nations. No national identity. What possible hope could there have been for the Jews to return to that land and be restored as a nation? It wasn't very high because the Jews all over were hated by people and were held in captivity. So beginning in 1948, Jews began to return to Israel. They purchased land, began to settle down and expand that. They restored Hebrew as their spoken and written language. And so there's the nation today, Israel, as a nation. You notice that Isaiah's prophecy was literally fulfilled. They're there as a nation, as a people. Now, I've traveled all over that territory. I've dug in Jordan, and I haven't seen any Ammonites or Edomites in the territory. You know, you can walk up to an Arab and say, "You happen to be an Edomite?" You know the Edomites? Gone. Amorites? Gone. Where? Scattered, disappeared. But right across the Jordan, here's Israel, speaking Hebrew, their ancient language. You can't find anybody speaking Moabite or Ammonite. Gone. The only nation in history in that region to be restored to its land and its language and to the Torah. In fulfillment of clear biblical prophecy. Thirdly, the sign of the last days will be false prophets, and Christ will be all over the place. Jesus describes first the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 in Luke 21 and other passages, and then he talks about the church age and the tribulation, Luke 21, verses 12 to 24. There's a special warning in all this in Luke chapter 21, verse 28. But when these things begin to take place, that is the things that Luke is talking about, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption, that is the rapture, is drawing near. So the signs of false prophets today is very obvious and widespread. Matthew 24 says, verses 5 and 11, "For many will come in my name, claiming I am Christ, and will deceive many. And many false prophets will appear and deceive." 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, same idea. "Little children, this is the last hour, and as you've heard that Antichrist are coming, now many have already come. We know it's the last hour." So in literature and television and all forms of communication, apostasies, false teaching, diversions from the faith are there and have become sophisticated influences in our world. Thousands have turned to Eastern mystery religions and to the occult. Remember Jim Jones and Charles Manson and these small little occult centers. There will be the sign of international unrest. Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars." How's that fit today's world? You know right now there are 51 wars going on in the world. By the way, 47 of them are Islamically related. We can say much about that and how that fits the book of Daniel and some other things that will occur in the future, but we'll have to pass up that temptation. But the end times, there will be wars and rumors of wars. But see that you're not alarmed. Such things must happen. The end is still to come. We're not there yet. We don't know the moment of Christ's return. He can come any moment. There's nothing to stop the rapture of the church. Tonight it could occur. By the way, if it occurred tonight, would that be an inconvenience? Would the coming of Jesus in the rapture for his people be an inconvenience to us? But Lord, I've got my plans. Golf on Monday. Oh, it wouldn't be golf this time of the year. Oh, I know golfers are pretty goofy. They may play any time of the year. Have you ever thought about that? If Jesus were to come tonight, would you regard that to be an inconvenience? How high a priority have we put on our plans and our prospects? Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. 50 wars going on. That's not counting, by the way, the revolutionary activities are going on in Venezuela and other countries where people are in the streets and people are getting killed. Of course, this has always been the case. There have been wars and there have been uprisings, but we are seeing the numbers in staggering proportions. The signs of famines and pestilence and earthquakes will be a characteristic of the last days. Matthew chapter 24, there will be famines and earthquakes. Have you seen the pictures from Africa? Where hundreds of thousands have died in famine. The violence that's scattered across our world in the light of that. We're not talking about 10, 20,000. In Sudan, more than 200,000 people slaughtered. In Syria, 160,000 Syrians slaughtered. Millions now fleeing the land. Now we have Ukraine and the threats that are there. There is Libya. So all around are these places where violence continues, as in the Philippines and so forth. And the Lord says, in the last days, look for that to occur, along with famines and earthquakes. Sixthly, there will be the sign of worldwide persecution. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, people will be without self-control. They will be brutal, not lovers of good, and treacherous. Recently, BBC had a special on torture in our modern world. It was horrible. Went all the way back to World War II and the Japanese escapades throughout the islands in that region in the modern era. And even in Syria, they have shown graphic and disturbing pictures of physical torture of men, women, and children. In Sudan, some of the children have been victimized. What kind of world do we live in? How far in depravity has it gone? And the people will be treacherous. The church, I believe, in these last days will undergo opposition and persecution. It's already happening. We need to be prepared for those days when we will not be in a peaceful setting or a favored minority. The sign of the end times will be apostasy and people falling away from the faith. You will find that in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for in that day will not come until the rebellion occurs. That is, unless the apostasy comes first. 2 Timothy 3:5. Holding to a form of godliness, they will decline its power. There's the sign of moral collapse of the individual, home, and the nation. 2 Timothy chapter 3 talks about these pressures and moral collapse. And by the way, the pressures are on pastors throughout the country. 40% of the pastors last year said that they considered leaving the ministry in the previous 3 months of that survey. 40% of the pastors in the U.S. contemplated leaving the ministry. 60 churches close each week in the U.S. 100,000 churches will close by the end of the next 6 years. There are signs of movement toward a one world religion, an economic legal system. The European community, you know about that, the development of trade zones, worldwide communication systems, all of this works to the time when this Antichrist will rise after the rapture and will be an economic genius. He will already have probably a world monetary system, a world judicial system. That's what they're all pushing in the United Nations, or the untied nations, I call them. It's like Washington, D.C. I call that the District of Confusion. I contend that Satan probably spends more of his time in Washington, D.C. than he does anywhere else. And I think the facts speak to that. There will be the sign of Egypt's rise to prominence. Now, that sounds interesting, but you read Isaiah chapter 19, Egypt's going to play a key role in the last days. So the concluding question is this: are we living in the last days? Yes. 3 powerful questions, and I conclude. Do we really long for his coming? There is a crown of righteousness for all those who love his appearing. 2 Timothy 4:8. The problem is a lot of people are captured more by what's in 2 Timothy 3:2, where people be lovers of their own selves. Or 2 Timothy 4:10, they love this present world. So my question is to all of us this morning: are we ready for his coming? And secondly, do we really care? Do you ever think about the coming of the Lord? John says to think about it as to purify your life. Do you ever say in your prayers, "Please come quickly, Lord Jesus"? Apostle John said that in Revelation. You really long to be with him? Will that rapture be an anticipated event with joy? I hope so. And as we live in these days of disastrous, crumbling morals and restrained behavior, and persecution becomes ugly, are you ready to stand and to say, "I am a child of God and I'm not going to be moved"? A lot of saints paid a high price for that, but what glorious crowns they will receive afterward. So as we look at our world and its crumbling morals, that means that for us, maybe in a short time, we need to be winning people to Christ. The days may be very short. And that's a compulsion to reach out. If we really believe that you're without Christ and you're lost and there's an eternity in hell, I know that's not a favored word. I had a lady tell me, "Well, I believe in heaven, but I don't believe in hell." I said, "That's not your choice." And you know, Jesus talked more about the judgment of hell than he did about the joys of heaven. He was serious about the judgment of God. If we really believe that, why are we so casual about the lost? There ought to be a passion in our heart. You have a wild game dinner here to reach people. Man, you all should have been here to support the group. And if there were visitors coming here without Christ, a chance to meet them and show them just how happy and peaceful and content a Christian can be. Now, if you're a grouch, stay home. But the rest of you all come. That's a little thing you can do, but it's one way to mark a heart of evangelism. And these guys really worked hard. They did a great job. This is one of the finest wild game dinners I've been to in terms of food and organization and everything else. You're to be commended. It doesn't surprise me. I know how Rittman works around here. They're good people. But I hope you have it next year, and I hope you pack this place out and have lots of people here without Christ that can make that decision, because we don't know how long it'll be before he comes, and we want to be ready. Let's pray. Father, we pray that you will warm our hearts with the truth of your word, give us confidence and courage as we walk day by day. Help us to be a witness for the Lord Jesus in these very dark days that are now upon us and will grow in the future. Give us strength of witness and contentment in our faith. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.